and welcome. This is Wilrens for Create a Learning Site, the place to go deeper in your understanding of the Bible. So I'm back with the humongous microphone for this month's issue of Create a Learning Site. As always, if you would like to read this information, you can go to the website at www.wilrens.org. You can also sign up there to get a monthly notification when a new letter and YouTube video appears. This month's issue is about the book of Ecclesiastes. For a long time, I've had a nagging doubt about this book. It's a sense that I'm missing something. Obviously, this is not an easy book. There is, for instance, the issue of authorship. Was it Solomon or not? But much more there's the content that's difficult. The book seems to have such a black outlook on life, and then there's all sorts of tensions or perhaps even contradictions. To name just one, does the wicked do well and prolong his life, or does he not? Both are asserted in the book. So I wonder, is there something I've overlooked? Is there historical background information or a way of explaining this book that would throw an entirely different light on it and enable us to make sense of it? Did someone out there crack the code and I'm not aware of it? Well, maybe not. I went on a quest. I have not found a golden key that instantly makes everything clear. But at least my efforts haven't been a chasing after wind either. I have made some progress that I will share with you in this issue. First, let's look at authorship. The author is never mentioned by name. Instead, he presents himself or is presented in the third person form with the Hebrew word kohelet. This derives from the same root as kahal, which means assembly. In Greek, kahal is translated as ecclesia, which means church, or is usually translated as church in English, I should perhaps say. And this is where the name Ecclesiastes comes from. So it appears to be a title rather than a personal name, which is confirmed by the fact that it, in the book it always appears with the article. But what does it mean? It suggests someone who assembles or gathers. Some have argued that this refers to the collection of proverbs and other wise sayings that we have in the book. More likely, it is something that has to do with people and takes place in the assembly, the gathering of the people. For this reason, the term kohelet is often translated as preacher, or perhaps better, teacher, the teacher. Since the author obviously stands in the tradition of the wise men and women of Israel, who were more likely to teach than to preach in our sense of the word. Even though no name is given, there are a few statements made about the author that taken together can only point to Solomon. Ecclesiastes 1 verse 1 describes him as the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Then 1 verse 12 describes him, or he himself states, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel, not Judah, in Jerusalem. In 1:16 it says that he surpassed all who were in Jerusalem before him, and in 2 verse 7 that he had greater possession than any who had been before him in Jerusalem. Now, there are problems with this identification, however, and even a significant number of conservative scholars do not believe that Solomon is the author. I will mention two of their reasons or arguments. First, Solomon, his name is never mentioned in the book, and it's only in chapter 1 and 2 that the speaker presents himself as king. In the rest of the book, he is simply speaking as a wise man, not a king. And then 2, there's the Hebrew used in the book. It is often considered to be much later than that of Solomon's time. There are Aramaic and Persian words used, which is taken as an indication that the book was written in exilic or post-exilic times. That's a difficult argument for me to judge, since it's beyond my circle of competence. But those are 2 clear reasons why people think Solomon could not have been the author. But then, if Solomon's not the author, there's a problem as well. The technical term for this is pseudonymity, writing under a false name. Okay, it doesn't use the name, but it certainly does lead us to believe that this is Solomon speaking, at least in chapter 1 and 2. It's not only problematic that he's using a false identity, he would also be describing doing things he did not actually do. Is there a way to explain this? As I was working on this book, the Logos Free Book of the Month came out, and it happened to be the commentary on Ecclesiastes in the Believer's Church Bible Commentary by Douglas Miller. Great timing, could it have been better? Miller points to 2 literary forms that may have influenced the opening chapters of Ecclesiastes: royal inscriptions and royal autobiography. In royal inscriptions, a king would boast of his accomplishments. Royal autobiography was usually written after a king's death, and is in that sense fictional. As Miller puts it, the fictional royal autobiography is the apparent memoir of a monarch who writes in order to pass along wisdom gained from experience. Ecclesiastes does not simply mimic this form, it turns it into a parody. These kings and their scribes, who wrote the supposed autobiography, took themselves quite seriously, would teach with a pose of wisdom and authority on how to live life. According to Miller, when Kohelet takes on the persona of Solomon, the wisest king of all, it turns out to be all smoke and vapor. In this view, Kohelet lets Solomon posthumously reflect on his life as if engaging in a research project. There is a clear thesis statement, all is vanity. There is a research question, what does man gain by all the toil? There is a series of experiments with observations and discussion, results and discussion. And then there's a conclusion, which amounts to a resounding confirmation of the thesis statement. Anyone who's done a report on a research project should recognize the format. So, is there pseudonymity after all? Now, under one condition, it would not be problematic to pretend to be, in this case, Solomon, but it would have been clear to the original audience, being familiar with the type of literature, that the real author was merely playing the role of Solomon. It's impossible to tell if this was the case, if the first readers would have picked this up, but it is at least a possibility, and if they did pick it up, it would be an explanation for these first two chapters. And the other possibility continues to be Solomonic authorship. I don't think this view has been disproven. The evidence is not entirely conclusive. Two observations have led to theories about the involvement of more than one person in crafting the final version of the book. Now, most of the book is written in the I form, but both the beginning and the end of the book speak about Kohelet in third person. So is this a later addition? And do the concluding verses of the book agree or disagree with the rest of the book? There are a number of people who think that the final editor actually disagrees with Kohelet and sort of warns against the more extreme, shocking parts of his sayings and kind of corrects it at the end. Now, I don't find this view convincing, because I don't see why an editor would give so much space, so much room to a view he finds problematic, and then fails to make it clear, because the vast majority of readers miss it, that the reader should actually read much of the book of Ecclesiastes as dangerous and, well, wrong, as something we are meant to disagree with. It doesn't look like that to me. Now, the second observation has to do with the tensions or contradictions, apparent contradictions, that we find in the text. Ecclesiastes, for instance, is at first sight quite negative. Now, if everything is meaningless, or absurd, depending on your translation, why then the counsel to enjoy life? That runs like a refrain through the book. Isn't this equally meaningless? Did a later scribe correct Kohelet's presumed cynicism by adding more orthodox and more conventional wisdom sayings to balance out some of those shocking statements? Again, I don't think so. Kohelet is not cynical, and he's not a nihilist, but a realist. For a lot of people in this world, life is tough, at least part of the time, and especially towards the end. Besides, as we'll see in the next section, Kohelet is not as negative as it appears, due to a subtle mistranslation of a key term that we'll have to look at. It makes more sense to me to see the tensions in the book as inherent not in the mind of the author, as if we were confused, nor in a multiplicity of authors, but as innate to life. We are not dealing with contradictions, but with the paradoxical nature of reality. Life is filled with paradox. We now come to the best insight I gained, also thanks to Douglas Miller's commentary, where he did his PhD on Ecclesiastes, and the core of his contribution was a study of the key Hebrew term Hewel, which appears 38 times in the book, including at the beginning and at the end, where it sort of looks like a thesis statement at the beginning of the book and a a conclusion at the end. It's what the book seeks to establish. This is the ESV version of this opening and ending in the book. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And at the end, vanity of vanities again, says the preacher, all is vanity. Now, the repetition of a Hebrew word turns it into a superlative. And so perhaps a better translation would be utter or supreme vanity, says the preacher. When you compare versions, you find that quite a few different terms have been used to translate this Hebrew term. For instance, meaningless, absurd, empty, futile, and others as well. Now, of course, all of this seems to reflect an excessively negative outlook on life. Douglas Miller went to great lengths to investigate each occurrence of the term in Ecclesiastes, and as it turns out, none of the translations listed here, and most others, as the same, can be used consistently. In each case, there are statements in the book where this translation does not make sense. For instance, in chapter 11, verse 9 and 10, it says, "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity." Now, there is a contradiction here. If Hevel does indeed mean vanity or meaninglessness, then why then would you rejoice in it? But there's no contradiction if we are to understand here that youth is fleeting and does not last long. So rejoice in it while it lasts. At the same time, this translation, fleeting or transient, which works well in this case, will not work for other occurrences of the term. Miller therefore argues that we should understand the term as a symbol or broad metaphor. This is the original meaning of the word actually, and therefore we should translate vapor or smoke. Such a picture, such a metaphor, can easily have more than one meaning. It's more flexible, depending on context. Both vapor and smoke represent something that is transitory or fleeting, that's insubstantial, it lacks substance, and it can be foul or bad, especially when you think of the image of smoke that blows into your eyes or something like that. Translating vapor or smoke gives us one term that fits every occurrence. It also means that Ecclesiastes or Kohelet is not quite as negative about life as other translations suggest. Life is fleeting and things may lack substance, but that doesn't make them entirely meaningless. It still makes sense then to look for enjoyment in life and to remember God in it all. This is not the whole story, but then neither is Ecclesiastes the whole Bible. As Miller puts it, Kohelet is not declaring all of life to be meaningless or absurd. He uses vapor to describe a life full of perplexities, tensions, difficulties. In this context, he offers help for living with both the good and bad aspects of life. Ecclesiastes is a necessary counterweight to the more conventional and simple wisdom of a book like Proverbs, where the righteous usually do well and the wicked do not. In reality, life is messy and full of, not contradiction, but paradox. Coelet brings out this paradox by stating a thing and its opposite, or at least by bringing together statements that appear to be in conflict to each other. Because it all depends. Both a thing and its opposite can be true, depending on the situation. As such, the book functions as an argument against simplistic answers. One modern application of this, it makes for a devastating critique of the health and wealth gospel. Life does not follow simplistic rules or dogmas. Okay, that's it for this month. Hope to talk to you again next month.
The show will be starting in just a few moments. Thank you for your patience. The show will be starting in just a few moments. Thank you for your patience.